Emma Carter had just lost the only job she'd held for 11 years, divorced, nearly out of savings, and with nowhere to go. She believed her life had finally hit rock bottom, but instead of searching for another office job, she did something that left everyone speechless. She spent every dollar she had on a dying cattle ranch that locals swore was cursed. They laughed, saying she'd be gone before the first winter, just like every owner before her. Then, only days after moving in, a single newborn calf wandered away from the sick herd and led Emma to something hidden on the property. Something no one had discovered in decades. What she found beneath that forgotten pasture would change not only the future of the ranch, but her own life forever. Before we uncover that secret, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. If it's morning, I hope you have a wonderful day ahead. If you're winding down for the evening, I hope this story helps you relax. Leave a comment below to join the conversation. And if you enjoy heartfelt ranch stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next adventure. Emma Carter stared at the cardboard box on the passenger seat as rain streaked across her windshield. 11 years of performance awards, framed photos, a coffee mug with the company logo, and a potted plant were all that remained of a career she had believed would last a lifetime. That morning, her manager had thanked her for her dedication before explaining that restructuring had eliminated her position. The words had sounded polite, almost rehearsed, but they still echoed in her mind as she drove back to the apartment that had felt too quiet ever since her divorce 2 years earlier. She unlocked the door, placed the box on the kitchen table, and looked around at the neat but empty rooms. For the first time in years, there was nowhere she needed to be the next morning. She opened her laptop, hoping another job listing might offer comfort. Yet every posting reminded her of the same routine she no longer wanted. Hours passed until a real estate listing caught her eye. Cattle ranch for sale, priced to sell. The photos showed weathered fences, faded barns, and rolling Montana hills beneath an endless sky. It looked nothing like success, but it looked honest. Before she could talk herself out of it, Emma requested a viewing. 3 days later, she found herself driving through open country, where traffic gave way to gravel roads, and grazing cattle dotted the landscape. The ranch appeared even rougher than the photographs. Fence posts leaned at odd angles, the paint peeled from the farmhouse porch, and the main barn roof sagged under years of neglected repairs. A few thin cattle wandered slowly through dry pasture. Waiting beside the gate stood Harold Briggs, a gray-haired man with tired eyes and rough hands that revealed a lifetime of ranch work. He greeted her with a quiet handshake and led her around the property without trying to hide its flaws. The water troughs needed replacing. The equipment was old. Several sections of fencing had collapsed after recent storms. When Emma asked why he was selling so cheaply, Harold paused before answering. "Sometimes a place just wears a person down." It wasn't the full answer, but she sensed he had no interest in explaining further. They stepped into the farmhouse, where sunlight filtered through dusty windows. The furniture was simple. The floors creaked with every step. Yet the view from the back porch stretched across wide green valleys framed by distant mountains. Emma imagined mornings filled with fresh air instead of traffic, evenings measured by sunsets instead of office deadlines. She knew almost nothing about ranching, but for the first time since losing her job, she felt something she hadn't expected: possibility. Harold placed the contract on the old kitchen table. "You should sleep on it," he said. Emma looked once more through the window toward the quiet pasture. Logic told her to walk away, save her remaining money, and search for another office position. Instead, she picked up the pen and signed her name. Harold nodded silently, folded the papers, and handed her the keys. As Emma stepped outside, an older rancher from the neighboring property slowed his pickup beside the gate. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "Name's Ben Walker," he said. "I hope you know what you're doing." Emma managed a nervous smile. Ben shook his head, glanced toward the worn-out fields, and sighed. "No one has managed to keep this ranch longer than 2 years." He drove away, leaving Emma alone at the gate with a ring of unfamiliar keys and a warning she couldn't ignore. Emma spent her first morning on the ranch with a notebook in one hand and a long list of problems in the other. The farmhouse was livable but needed repairs. The generator rattled whenever it started, and every fence she inspected seemed to lean a little farther than the last. She had expected hard work. She had not expected to feel so completely unprepared. By sunrise, she was already wearing borrowed work gloves, trying to understand equipment that looked older than she was. Every task took twice as long as she imagined. Every mistake reminded her that she had traded conference rooms for corrals. By sunrise, she was already wearing borrowed work gloves, trying to understand equipment that looked older than she was. Every task took twice as long as she imagined. Every mistake reminded her that she had traded conference rooms for corrals without knowing the first thing about running a cattle ranch. The herd looked worse up close. Several cows were thinner than they should have been, their coats dull instead of healthy. A few stood apart from the others with little interest in eating. Emma quietly counted every animal against Harold's records and realized the numbers matched. But the condition of the cattle did not. She filled water troughs, checked gates, and watched the herd move slowly across the pasture. Nothing felt normal, although she lacked the experience to explain why. Late that morning, Ben Walker pulled into the yard with a toolbox in the back of his truck. "Figured you'd need help getting the water pump running," he said. Emma thanked him, relieved to see a familiar face. While replacing a worn valve, Ben explained the basics of checking fences, feeding schedules, and keeping stress low in the herd. Emma listened carefully, writing notes whenever he wasn't looking. She tried to fasten a loose gate after he finished, only to hang it backward. Ben chuckled softly before showing her the correct way. "You'll learn," he said. "Just don't expect ranching to be kind while you're figuring it out." In the afternoon, a dusty pickup stopped outside the barn. A woman wearing muddy boots stepped out carrying a veterinary bag. "You must be Emma," she said with an easy smile. "I'm Lily Brooks." Emma introduced herself and admitted she had requested a health check on the herd because something felt wrong. Lily examined several cattle with practiced efficiency, checking temperatures, breathing, and body condition. She frowned more with each animal. "They've been dealing with this for a while," she finally said. "Poor weight gain, recurring infections, and weak calves. It's not spreading like a sudden outbreak, but it isn't improving either." "Can you treat it?" Emma asked. Lily hesitated. "We can manage symptoms and support the weaker animals, but unless we understand what's causing it, we'll keep fighting the same battle." Emma glanced toward the pasture, where the cattle grazed without much energy. She had barely owned the ranch for a few days, yet every answer seemed to create another question. Before leaving, Lily handed her a list of supplements, feed adjustments, and medications that would help the weakest cows. Emma looked at the prices and felt her stomach tighten. Buying the ranch had consumed nearly all her savings. Repairs were already costing more than she expected, and now veterinary expenses threatened to drain what little remained. Even so, she drove into town before sunset and purchased everything on the list. Back at the ranch, she worked until dusk, carrying feed, cleaning troughs, and checking each animal one more time. As darkness settled across the valley, she noticed one heavily pregnant cow pacing near the barn instead of resting with the herd. The animal breathed harder than the others and pawed nervously at the ground. Emma remembered Lily mentioning that the cow was still weeks away from calving. Uneasy, she reached for her phone and called the veterinarian. Lily answered immediately. "Stay with her," she said. "I'm on my way." Emma knelt beside the restless cow as another painful contraction rippled through its body. The birth had started far too early, and neither of them knew if the calf would survive. By the time Lily's truck pulled into the yard, the frightened cow was already lying on her side inside the barn. Emma held a flashlight while Lily quickly examined the animal. "She's in premature labor," Lily said calmly. "The calf is small, but we still have a chance if everything goes smoothly." Emma nodded, trying to stay steady despite the knot in her stomach. She followed every instruction without hesitation, fetching clean towels, warm water, and fresh bedding. The labor was slow and difficult. Several times the exhausted cow struggled to push, then rested before trying again. Finally, a tiny calf slipped into the straw. She barely moved. For a long second, the barn fell silent, except for the cow's heavy breathing. Emma looked at Lily with growing fear. Lily immediately cleared the calf's nose and mouth, rubbed her chest with a towel, and encouraged Emma to keep stimulating her. "Come on," Lily whispered. "Breathe." Another few seconds passed before the calf released a weak cough, then another. At last, she drew a shaky breath. Emma let out one of her own without realizing she had been holding it. "She's alive," Lily said with a tired smile, "but she's going to need a lot of help." The calf was smaller than any Emma had imagined, her legs too weak to support her weight after the mother licked her clean. Emma stayed in the barn for hours, helping the newborn nurse for the first time. Every tiny success felt enormous before leaving near dawn. Lily reminded Emma to keep the calf warm, monitor her constantly, and call if anything changed. "She's a fighter," Lily said. "Sometimes that's enough to surprise us." As the sun rose over the ranch, Emma sat on an overturned bucket watching the little calf sleep beside her mother. For the first time since buying the ranch, she smiled. She decided to call the calf Hope. The name felt right. During the following days, Emma built her routine around Hope's care. She checked the calf before sunrise, bottle-fed her whenever necessary, and celebrated every unsteady step across the barn. Hope remained smaller than the others should have been, but she grew stronger each morning. Even Ben, who rarely offered compliments, stopped by one afternoon and watched the calf wobble across the pen. "Didn't think she'd make it," he admitted. "Neither did I," Emma replied. "Guess she had other plans." Ben gave a quiet nod before helping Emma repair another broken section of fencing. Although he still questioned whether she could run the ranch, he no longer looked at her like a complete outsider. The good news around Hope was balanced by discouraging signs elsewhere. Several older cows continued losing weight despite improved feed and medication. One developed another infection. Another refused to eat for nearly a day before slowly recovering. Lily returned to examine them again and frowned at the familiar symptoms. "The treatments are helping a little," she said, "but not enough. Something keeps affecting this herd." Emma looked across the pasture. "Could it be the feed?" Lily shook her head. "I've seen this before, but never lasting this long without a clear cause." That evening, Ben lingered after finishing repairs. As they watched the cattle drift toward the water trough, Emma asked the question that had been bothering her since she arrived. "Why did everyone tell me this ranch never lasts?" Ben rested his arms on the fence. "Years ago, this place had one of the strongest herds around. Then the cattle started getting sick. Owners came and went. Some blamed bad luck, others blamed the land itself. Nobody ever found an answer." "Do you believe it's just bad luck?" Emma asked. Ben gave a small shrug. "I don't believe in curses. I believe every problem has a reason. Sometimes people stop looking before they find it." His words stayed with Emma long after he drove home the next afternoon, while she carried fresh hay into the pasture. Hope slipped through an open gate. Emma expected the tiny calf to wander only a few yards before stopping. Instead, Hope ignored the rest of the herd and trotted across the field toward the far edge of the property, heading for a distant corner almost completely hidden by tall grass and thick brush. Emma called her name, but the little calf kept going, as though she already knew exactly where she wanted to be. Emma hurried after Hope, pushing through waist-high grass that had clearly gone untouched for years. The little calf moved with surprising determination, weaving between scattered rocks and old fence posts until she disappeared behind a dense line of shrubs near the edge of the property. By the time Emma caught up, Hope had stopped beside a narrow stream no wider than a few feet. Crystal clear water flowed quietly over smooth stones, hidden beneath overhanging branches that shaded it from the afternoon sun. Hope lowered her head and drank eagerly before nibbling on the greener grass surrounding the stream. Emma looked back toward the main pasture. The herd's regular water trough sat hundreds of yards away, supplied by an aging system she had never questioned. Kneeling beside the stream, she cupped a handful of water. It felt cold and fresh, unlike the slightly stale smell she had noticed near the troughs. She couldn't explain why, but the difference immediately caught her attention. Hope lingered there for several minutes before calmly following Emma back toward the barn. The next morning, Emma returned to the hidden stream alone. The grass around it was healthier than anywhere else on the ranch, and fresh hoofprints suggested Hope had visited more than once. Emma filled a clean bottle with water before driving into town to find Lily. When she arrived at the veterinary clinic, Lily looked up from a stack of paperwork. "Everything all right with Hope?" she asked. "She's doing well," Emma replied, placing the bottle on the counter. "But I found this on the far side of the ranch. Can you have it tested?" Lily held the bottle to the light, examining the clear water. "I can send it to a lab. It'll take a few days, but we'll see if anything stands out." Emma thanked her and headed home with more questions than answers. That afternoon, she decided to speak with Harold Briggs. She found him repairing equipment behind the small house where he had moved after selling the ranch. Harold listened quietly as Emma described the hidden stream. His expression changed for only a moment before returning to its usual calm. "Did you know it was there?" Emma asked. Harold wiped his hands on a rag. "There's a lot of things on that property people stop paying attention to after enough years. Was the stream ever used for the cattle?" He looked away toward the distant hills. "I don't remember." The answer sounded carefully chosen rather than honest. Emma sensed he knew more, but pressing him further accomplished nothing. She drove back feeling both frustrated and more determined. If Harold refused to explain the ranch's history, perhaps the property itself would. The following day, she began cleaning one of the old storage sheds behind the barn. Broken tools, rusted buckets, and cracked wooden crates filled the space from floor to ceiling. Dust covered everything. Hours passed as she sorted piles into items worth saving and things beyond repair. Near the back wall, hidden beneath a torn canvas tarp, she discovered a narrow wooden chest. Inside were faded notebooks, several brittle photographs, and a rolled piece of heavy paper tied with worn string. She carefully untied it and spread it across an old workbench. It was a hand-drawn map of the ranch, much older than the documents Harold had given her at closing. Emma immediately noticed something strange. A broad blue line crossed the center of the property before curving through the northern pasture. According to the map, a sizable creek had once flowed across land where only dry fields existed today. She compared the drawing with her memory of the hidden stream. The small trickle Hope had found seemed to lie near the edge of the route marked on the old map. Emma stared at the faded ink, trying to understand how a creek large enough to appear so prominently could simply disappear. Holding the map in her hands, she realized she had uncovered the first piece of a puzzle that no one had bothered to solve. The old map stayed folded on the passenger seat as Emma drove into town the next morning. Instead of heading to the feed store, She parked outside the county records office, a modest brick building that held decades of land surveys, property deeds, and agricultural reports. She explained to the clerk that she was researching the history of her ranch and showed him the faded map. After studying it for a moment, he disappeared into a back room and returned with several dusty archive folders. Most contained routine property transfers, but one file immediately caught Emma's attention. Years earlier, a small water diversion project had redirected a natural creek during nearby excavation work. The official report described it as temporary, yet later inspection notes revealed the original channel had never been fully restored. Emma traced the route with her finger. The creek shown on the report matched the one on her old map. It had once crossed the heart of the ranch before being diverted away, leaving only a small hidden stream behind. She copied the records, thanked the clerk, and drove straight to Ben's place. He read the documents in silence, his weathered face growing heavier with every page. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. "I remember when they started that project," he admitted quietly. "A few of us argued it would change the land. We were told everything would be put back the way it was." "Why didn't anyone fight harder?" Emma asked. Ben sighed. "We tried. But once the work was finished, the companies moved on. The paperwork closed, and people stopped listening. After a while, folks just accepted that the ranch had gone bad." Emma looked toward the hills through the kitchen window. "Maybe it never went bad. Maybe it lost what kept it healthy." Ben slowly nodded. "Could be." On her way back, Emma stopped at Lily's clinic. The laboratory report on the water sample had arrived that morning. Lily handed her the results. "The sample from the hidden stream looks clean," she explained. "Nothing unusual showed up. It's much better quality than I'd expected." Emma hesitated. What if the cattle had regular access to that water instead of relying on the trough system? Lily considered the question. If the main water source has been contributing to long-term health problems, restoring a cleaner supply could make a real difference. It wouldn't solve everything overnight, but it would certainly help. For the first time in weeks, Emma felt she had more than hope. She had a direction. That afternoon, she walked the property with the old map, comparing landmarks with what remained on the ground. The hidden stream appeared to follow part of the original creek before disappearing beneath a stretch of overgrown earth. She marked several locations with wooden stakes, estimating where the buried channel might still exist. The work was slow, and she quickly realized the project would require equipment, materials, and labor she could barely afford. Even replacing a few damaged drainage sections would cost more than the cash left in her account. Still, giving up no longer felt like an option. Ben arrived with a shovel before sunset. "Figured you shouldn't start this alone," he said. Together they cleared brush and dug through compacted soil near the marked line. After hours of work, they uncovered damp earth beneath the surface, enough to convince Emma they were close to something larger. They planned to continue the next morning, as dusk settled across the ranch. Dark clouds gathered over the western mountains. The wind strengthened, carrying the sharp scent of approaching rain. Emma secured loose tools and checked the cattle before heading inside. During the night, the storm struck with full force. Powerful winds battered the farmhouse. Heavy rain pounded the roof and thunder rolled across the valley for hours. At first light, Emma stepped outside and felt her heart sink. Sections of newly cleared ground had collapsed back into the trench. Fresh mud covered the worksite. Fencing lay broken along the pasture, and much of the progress she and Ben had made had disappeared beneath storm debris. Emma stood in the muddy pasture as the storm clouds drifted east, staring at the damage in silence. Fence posts had snapped under the force of the wind. Sections of wire lay tangled in the grass, and the trench she and Ben had spent hours digging had nearly vanished beneath collapsed soil. The feed shed had not escaped either. Rainwater had seeped through the aging roof, soaking several stacks of hay before she could move them to safety. Every ruined bale represented money she could not afford to lose. She spent the morning clearing debris instead of making progress. Ben arrived shortly after sunrise without being asked. Together, they reset broken fence posts and gathered scattered tools. Neither of them spoke much. The amount of work ahead was obvious. By midday, the repaired fence was standing again. But both of them knew it was only a temporary fix as they rested beside the barn. Ben looked toward the herd. "They're not moving like healthy cattle," he said quietly. Emma followed his gaze. Several cows stood with lowered heads, showing little interest in grazing despite the fresh grass left by the rain. Lily drove in later that afternoon after Emma called to report the storm damage and the condition of the herd. She examined the weakest animals one by one. Although none appeared to be in immediate danger, their slow recovery worried her. "The medications are helping them cope," she explained, "but they're still dealing with whatever has been affecting them for years." Emma folded her arms. "So even if I fix everything else, I could still lose them?" Lily hesitated before answering. "I'm saying the ranch needs more than repairs. It needs the right conditions to keep these animals healthy." After Lily left, Emma sat alone on the farmhouse porch, watching Hope wander beside her mother. The little calf was stronger now, moving confidently across the pasture, while the older cattle continued to struggle. Emma replayed every decision she had made since buying the ranch. She had spent nearly all her savings, worked from dawn until dark, and still seemed no closer to saving the property. For the first time, she wondered if everyone else had been right. Maybe she had made the biggest mistake of her life. That evening, she opened her laptop and looked through listings for ranches and farmland. Selling now would mean losing a substantial amount of money, but she might still have enough left to start over somewhere else. Her finger rested over the keyboard for several seconds before she quietly closed the screen without typing a single word. She wasn't ready to give up, but she no longer knew what her next step should be. 2 days later, an old pickup pulled into the driveway carrying her 15-year-old nephew, Noah Carter. He climbed out with a backpack slung over one shoulder and a wide grin that contrasted sharply with Emma's tired expression. "Mom said you could use an extra pair of hands," he said. Emma laughed for the first time in days and hugged him. "She's probably right." Noah had grown up visiting farms during school breaks and wasn't afraid of hard work. Within hours, he was helping repair gates, carrying feed, and cleaning the barn. His energy changed the mood around the ranch. Even simple conversations over dinner made the farmhouse feel less lonely. One afternoon, while Emma and Ben continued clearing storm debris near the old trench, Noah wandered through the overgrown section of pasture where Hope had first discovered the hidden stream. Curious about the uneven ground, he pushed aside thick weeds with a long branch. Suddenly, he struck something solid beneath the soil. Kneeling down, he brushed away the dirt until a length of rusted metal became visible. "Aunt Emma?" he called. Emma and Ben hurried over. Together they cleared more earth, revealing part of an old buried pipe running in the same direction as the creek marked on the faded ranch map. Ben stared at it for a long moment before looking at Emma. Neither of them spoke, but both realized they had just uncovered another piece of the ranch's forgotten past. Emma knelt beside the exposed pipe, while Noah brushed away more dirt with a small shovel. The rusted metal stretched farther than any of them expected, disappearing beneath packed earth toward the northern pasture. Ben crouched beside it, running his hand over the worn surface. "I haven't seen one of these in years," he said. "This wasn't built for livestock drinking troughs. It was part of an older water system." Emma unfolded the faded ranch map across the tailgate of Ben's truck, comparing the markings with the pipe's direction. She realized they lined up almost perfectly with the vanished creek shown on the map. "Then we're standing on the old route," she said. Ben nodded. Looks that way. They spent the next several days carefully uncovering sections of the buried line. The work was slow, made harder by roots, rocks, and soil compacted over decades. Emma's hands blistered despite her gloves. But each new section confirmed they were following the forgotten waterway. Noah kept their spirits up, joking whenever the digging became exhausting and eagerly measuring each stretch they uncovered. Even Hope wandered nearby, curiously watching the activity before returning to graze beside her mother. Word spread quietly through the neighboring ranches that Emma was trying to restore the old water system. One afternoon, 2 nearby ranchers stopped by with shovels and a small rented excavator. They remembered hearing stories about the creek from their parents and offered to help for a day. Emma thanked them, surprised that people who had once expected her to fail were now willing to lend a hand. Together they cleared enough earth to expose a collapsed section where rocks and debris had blocked the original channel. By late afternoon, the obstruction finally gave way. Wet soil darkened beneath their boots, followed by a slow trickle of cold, clear water that gradually spread through the shallow trench. No one cheered at first. They simply watched as the water continued flowing, growing steadier minute by minute. Ben smiled quietly. Looks like she's been waiting a long time. Emma could hardly believe it. The forgotten creek had never completely disappeared. It had only been trapped beneath years of neglect. The following morning, Lily arrived after Emma called with the news. She inspected the restored flora, collected fresh samples, and compared them with the earlier laboratory report. 2 days later, she returned, carrying the results. "The water quality is excellent," she said. "If you can safely redirect part of this supply to the herd, it'll be far better than relying only on the old trough system." Emma immediately began making temporary channels so the cattle could reach the cleaner water without damaging the banks. It took patience, but within days the herd gradually adjusted to the new watering area. The change was subtle at first. Several cows drank longer than usual. Others became more active during feeding. Lily cautioned that recovery would take time, yet she admitted she was encouraged by what she was seeing. A week later, Ben stopped beside the pasture fence as Emma finished checking the herd. "They're looking different," he observed. Emma followed his gaze. The weakest cows still needed care, but a few had begun gaining weight. Their coats looked healthier, and they moved with noticeably more energy across the grass. It wasn't a miracle. It was progress. Hope seemed to thrive more than ever. The once fragile calf now ran confidently through the pasture, often leading the younger calves as they explored the fields. Watching her race across the green hillside, Emma remembered the tiny animal she had nearly lost on her first night at the ranch. Ben folded his arms with a quiet smile. "Funny how the smallest one ended up showing us where to look." Emma reached over the fence as Hope trotted past, gently scratching the calf behind one ear. "I guess she knew this place better than any of us." Hope bounded away toward the restored stream, while behind her, the first healthy calves in years grazed peacefully beside mothers that finally seemed to be growing stronger. The changes across the ranch became impossible to ignore as summer settled over the valley. The cattle no longer gathered listlessly around the old troughs. They spread confidently across greener pasture, drinking from the restored water supply before returning to graze. Emma still walked the property every morning, checking fences, feed, and every animal by hand. But those walks no longer filled her with dread. Instead of counting new problems, she began noticing small victories. Several cows that had struggled for months steadily gained weight. Their coats regained a healthy shine, and their appetite returned. Lily visited regularly and smiled more with each inspection. "They're responding better than I hoped," she said after finishing another round of examinations. "Keep doing exactly what you're doing. Recovery takes time, but they're moving in the right direction." Emma thanked her. remembering how uncertain everything had felt only weeks earlier. There was still work ahead, yet for the first time the ranch seemed to be working with her instead of against her. The healthier herd also brought practical improvements. Buyers who had stopped calling began asking about future calves again. A local feed supplier, impressed by the visible progress, agreed to extend more flexible payment terms, giving Emma room to breathe financially. After weeks of carefully tracking expenses, she finally made the first payment toward the debt she had taken on to buy the ranch. It wasn't a large amount, but transferring the money felt like crossing an invisible line. She was no longer simply trying to survive, she was beginning to rebuild. Noah celebrated the moment with far more excitement than Emma expected. "This deserves better advertising," he said one evening, holding up his phone. Over the next few days, he filmed short videos around the ranch. He captured Hope running across the pasture, Emma repairing fences at sunrise, Ben sharing simple ranching tips, and peaceful views of the restored stream. Noah posted everything online with short captions about the ranch's recovery. Emma laughed at first, convinced only family members would watch. Instead, local residents began sharing the videos. Comments arrived from people encouraging her to keep going. A few families even drove out to purchase beef directly from the ranch after seeing its story. Emma found herself answering visitors' questions with growing confidence, something she could hardly have imagined when she first arrived. One afternoon, an aging pickup rolled slowly into the yard. Harold Briggs stepped out, removing his hat before speaking. Emma welcomed him onto the porch, unsure why he had come. For several moments he simply looked across the fields where healthier cattle grazed beneath the afternoon sun. "Looks different," he said quietly. "It feels different too," Emma replied. Harold nodded, his eyes settling on the restored stream in the distance. "I owe you the truth." He admitted that after the creek had been diverted years earlier, the ranch had never truly recovered. He had spent years trying different feeds, medicines, and breeding programs, believing every failure was his own fault. Eventually, the constant losses convinced him the property could not be saved. "When you asked me about the stream," he said, "I knew more than I admitted. I was ashamed. Selling the ranch felt like giving up on everything my family had built." Emma listened without anger. She understood that his silence had come from disappointment rather than malice. "You gave me the chance to find the answer," she said gently. Harold smiled with visible relief. Before leaving, he thanked her for refusing to quit when he had. A few days later, an official letter arrived from the county agricultural office. Emma opened the envelope at the kitchen table, while Noah and Ben watched from across the room. She read the invitation twice before looking up with a surprised smile. The ranch had been invited to exhibit cattle at the upcoming county livestock fair, an event that brought together the region's most respected ranchers each year. Ben leaned back in his chair and grinned. "Seems like people are finally paying attention." Emma folded the letter carefully, knowing the invitation represented more than a competition. It was the first sign that the community no longer saw her ranch as a lost cause. Before sunrise, on the morning of the county livestock fair, Emma walked quietly through the barn, checking each animal one last time. Months earlier, she had entered the same barn fearing she would lose the ranch. Now she tightened halters, brushed coats, and loaded a carefully selected group of cattle into the trailer with steady hands. Hope, no longer the fragile newborn that had struggled to breathe, trotted confidently beside the others, drawing smiles from everyone who saw her. Noah filmed the final preparations while Ben secured the trailer gates. "Ready?" he asked. Emma looked across the pasture for a brief moment before nodding. "As ready as I'll ever be." The fairgrounds buzzed with activity by the time they arrived. Ranchers from across the county unloaded prize cattle, greeted old friends, and prepared for judging. Emma immediately noticed curious glances from people who remembered the reputation of her ranch. Some whispered quietly when they saw the ranch name on the trailer, surprised it had returned after so many years. Instead of feeling intimidated, Emma focused on the animals. She checked their water, kept them calm, and followed every instruction from the event staff. Lily stopped by before judging began. After examining the cattle, she smiled. "They're in excellent condition," she said. "No matter what happens today, you've already accomplished something remarkable." Her words eased the last of Emma's nervousness. Throughout the morning, visitors wandered through the livestock barns, asking questions about the recovered herd. Noah eagerly shared the story of hope, pointing toward the young heifer that had become the unexpected symbol of the ranch's turnaround. Children gathered near the pen, fascinated by the calm, friendly animal. Even experienced ranchers paused to admire her healthy build and gentle temperament. Ben watched quietly from a distance before saying, "Funny how people used to avoid this place. Now they're stopping to learn from it." Emma smiled. "I never imagined that." When the judging finally began, Emma stood beside her cattle while officials carefully evaluated body condition, structure, and overall herd quality. The process seemed to last forever. She reminded herself that simply being invited to participate had already exceeded every expectation she held when she first bought the ranch. Still, she couldn't stop hoping. Late that afternoon, the announcer called competitors together for the results. Emma felt her heart race as ribbons were presented across each category. Then she heard the name of her ranch announced as the winner of the county's Herd Quality Recognition Award. For a brief second, she stood frozen before Noah cheered loudly and Ben patted her shoulder with unmistakable pride. Emma stepped forward to accept the award, overwhelmed by the applause from people who had once believed her ranch could never recover. Among the crowd, she noticed Harold smiling quietly beneath the brim of his hat. Their eyes met, and he gave a small nod that said everything words could not. After the ceremony, several ranchers approached Emma to congratulate her. A few asked about her breeding program. Others wanted to know how she had restored the property. More importantly, local buyers expressed interest in future calves and long-term contracts. The conversations continued well into the evening, giving Emma opportunities she had never expected only months earlier. As the trailer rolled back toward the ranch that night, Noah looked at the award resting safely on the seat between them. "Think this is the biggest day the ranch has ever had?" he asked. Emma laughed softly. "Maybe the biggest so far." A week later, an updated county livestock report arrived in the mail. Emma unfolded the pages at the kitchen table, while Ben and Noah waited nearby. The report showed herd numbers from ranches across the county, along with recent growth estimates. Ben studied the figures, then looked back at Emma with raised eyebrows. "Looks like your herd has grown faster than anyone predicted." Emma stared at the report, realizing just how far the ranch had come. The numbers suggested that if the current growth continued, the property would soon stand among the county's leading cattle operations, something that had once seemed impossible. She folded the report carefully, knowing the journey that had begun with losing everything was now leading somewhere she had never dared to imagine. 1 year later. The ranch looked nothing like the place Emma Carter had first driven into after losing her job. The broken fences had been replaced, the barns had been repaired, and healthy grass stretched across pastures that had once seemed lifeless. Every morning began the same way, with Emma walking the property before sunrise, checking the herd, and listening to the quiet sound of the restored creek flowing across the land. It had become more than a water source. It was a daily reminder that some problems were never impossible to solve. They only required someone willing to keep searching. The cattle reflected that change. Calves born during the past year were strong and active, and the older cows had regained the weight and energy they had lacked for so long. Lily continued visiting the ranch for routine health checks, but those appointments had become refreshingly uneventful. During her latest inspection, she closed her notebook with a satisfied smile. "This is one of the healthiest herds I've seen all season," she said. Emma thanked her, remembering the first day Lily had warned that treating symptoms alone would never save the ranch. Together they walked toward the restored stream, where Hope now stood beside a young calf of her own. The once fragile newborn had grown into a calm, healthy cow that watched over her first calf with quiet confidence. Lily laughed softly. "Hard to believe she's the same little fighter we nearly lost." Emma reached over the fence to stroke Hope's neck. "She never stopped leading us where we needed to go." Business improved with every passing month. Buyers who had once ignored the ranch now reserved calves well in advance. The flexible payment plan Emma had received from the feed supplier eventually became unnecessary because every installment on her debts was made on time. She even invested in better fencing and upgraded several aging pieces of equipment without sacrificing the careful budgeting she had learned during the hardest months. Noah returned whenever school vacations allowed, proudly recording each new improvement around the ranch. The videos he continued posting attracted visitors interested not only in cattle, but also in the story behind the ranch's recovery. Families often stopped by simply to meet Hope after hearing how one tiny calf had changed everything. Ben remained a regular presence, although his visits gradually shifted from teaching Emma the basics of ranching to simply sharing coffee on the porch after long days of work. One evening he looked across the peaceful pasture and smiled. "You know," he said, "I told you nobody kept this ranch longer than 2 years." Emma laughed. "I remember. Turns out I was wrong." "No," Emma replied. "You warned me because you cared. You also stayed when everyone else expected me to leave." Ben tipped his hat with a quiet grin, and neither of them felt the need to say anything more. Harold visited less often, but each visit became easier than the last. The weight he had carried for years slowly disappeared as he watched the property thrive again. During the annual autumn gathering at the ranch, he quietly thanked Emma once more for refusing to give up on a place he had believed was beyond saving. "You gave it a future," he said. Emma shook her head gently. "We all did." As neighbors arrived with homemade food and folding chairs for the celebration, laughter replaced the silence that had once defined the property. Children ran through the fields while ranchers exchanged stories near the barns. It felt less like a business and more like a community gathering. Near sunset, a representative from the county agricultural office stepped forward with a folder containing the latest livestock records. After congratulating several local ranchers on a successful season, he turned toward Emma with a broad smile. "According to this year's official county report," he announced, "Emma Carter's ranch now has the largest cattle herd in the county." Applause echoed across the yard. Emma stood still for a moment, overwhelmed by the words. Only a year earlier, she had arrived carrying little more than uncertainty, a box of belongings from a lost career, and a desperate hope that life could somehow begin again. Now she looked across a thriving ranch, surrounded by people who had become friends, mentors, and family. Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and the last light settled across the hills, Emma walked alone to the pasture where the restored creek flowed quietly beneath the trees. Hope grazed nearby with her calf, lifting her head as Emma approached. She rested a hand gently against Hope's shoulder and watched the herd spread peacefully across the valley. Losing her job had once felt like the end of everything she had worked for. Looking back, she realized it had only been the beginning of a different life, one she never would have found if she had stayed where she was comfortable. The ranch had recovered, the mystery had been solved, and the herd had grown beyond anyone's expectations. Yet the greatest change had not happened in the fields or the barns. It had happened inside the woman who had finally learned that starting over was not a sign of failure. Sometimes it was the first step toward finding the place where you truly belonged. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Emma smiled, listening to the gentle sound of the creek that had quietly waited all those years to be found. Grateful that she had followed one determined little calf to the life she was always meant to live.